No one moved as a rich teenager laughed and humiliated a tired waitress filming her pain for fun. The diner went silent, fear hanging heavier than the smell of coffee. Then one quiet man in the corner stood up. No one knew who he was, but seconds later, everything changed. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Morning arrived at the diner the same way it always did, quietly and without ceremony. The sun was just beginning to lift itself over the low highway hills, its pale light slipping through the worn aluminum blinds and laying thin golden stripes across the red vinyl booths. The checkered floor beneath them had been polished so many times over the years that the tiles had softened at the edges, carrying the subtle shine of routine rather than neglect. This was not a place that tried to impress. It never had. It existed simply to be there. The air was warm with familiar smells, fresh coffee brewed behind the counter, rich and slightly bitter, mingling with the comforting sizzle of bacon on the grill. Somewhere in the kitchen, a spatula scraped against metal in a steady rhythm, unhurried and practiced. Plates clinked softly. Mugs were set down with gentle thuds. The sounds blended into something almost musical, a soundtrack that regulars had learned to associate with safety and predictability. A pair of retired men sat in their usual booth near the window, nursing their coffee more than drinking it. One of them folded his newspaper slowly, glancing up every so often to comment on the weather or a local headline. Across the aisle, a trucker with tired eyes and broad shoulders leaned back, stretching his legs after hours on the road. He didn't rush his meal. He never did. This diner was a pause, a breath between miles. Near the counter, a young couple shared a plate of pancakes, speaking in low voices and smiling at nothing in particular. They were not celebrating anything special. They didn't need to. This place made ordinary mornings feel enough. Even the jukebox in the corner, silent and rarely used, seemed to belong here simply by existing its scratched surface, reflecting decades of passing lives. The diner had history in its walls. You could feel it in the grooves of the tables, in the slight wobble of certain chairs that no one bothered to fix because everyone knew how to sit around it. It had witnessed birthdays and breakups, quiet confessions, and loud laughter, first cups of coffee and last goodbyes. It was not fancy, it was honest. People came here because no one asked them to be anything more than who they were. Time moved differently inside these walls, slower, kinder. The rush of the outside world stayed beyond the parking lot, held at bay by the smell of grease and the comfort of habit. Here no one measured success, no one compared. They simply existed together for a few minutes, sharing space and warmth. Outside cars passed occasionally, tires humming against the asphalt, but inside the diner the world felt contained, predictable, safe. It was the kind of place where mornings felt stitched together by repetition, where yesterday and today looked almost the same, and tomorrow promised more of it. Nothing about this morning suggested it would be any different. Nothing hinted that the quiet balance of the room was about to be disturbed. And that was what made it feel so fragile, even before anyone realized it. Behind the counter, the coffee machine released a soft hiss as another pot finished brewing. Steam curled upward briefly, clouding the air before fading into nothing. The owner moved with slow familiarity, wiping the same section of the counter he had wiped thousands of times before. It wasn't about cleanliness anymore. It was habit, routine, a way of keeping the morning steady. His movements were quiet, respectful of the calm that settled over the diner like a blanket. Near the far wall, a clock ticked softly, its second hand circling with patient consistency. No one paid attention to it yet. Everyone moved in rhythm with it. Orders came in. Plates went out. Mugs were refilled without being asked for. This was a place where people remembered how you liked your eggs, whether you took sugar or cream, whether you preferred the booth by the window or the one near the back where the light was dimmer. It was familiarity made physical. A woman at the end of the counter stirred her coffee, absent-mindedly watching the cream swirl into dark brown spirals. She had been coming here since her kids were little. Now they were grown, living in other states, calling when they remembered. This diner had watched her life move forward in small increments. She found comfort in that, in places that stayed when people didn't. The door chimed softly as another regular stepped inside, shaking off the morning chill. He nodded at a few faces, received nods in return, and slid into his usual seat without a word. There was no need for greetings here. Presence was enough. The diner didn't demand conversation. It offered it when needed, and silence when it wasn't. The sunlight crept further across the floor, shifting the bright lines on the tiles, inch by inch. Dust motes floated lazily in the beams, unbothered by urgency. Outside, the sky was clear, promising a mild day. Inside, the warmth of the room wrapped around everyone, equally indifferent to who they were or what they carried with them. For many of the people here, this diner was the only place where expectations fell away. No one asked about careers or failures. No one demanded explanations. You could sit with your coffee and your thoughts and be left alone, or you could talk about nothing important at all. Both were acceptable. Both were respected. It was a sanctuary built not by design, but by repetition. By years of people showing up in the same place at the same time, trusting that it would still be there. Trusting that for a short while, the world would make sense. That kindness would be the default. That no one would be judged for being tired or old or ordinary. Nothing in the air felt sharp. Nothing felt dangerous. The room held a gentle neutrality, a balance so delicate it went unnoticed. The kind of balance people assume will always exist because it always has. The kind that feels permanent until it suddenly isn't. If anyone had paused to really look around, they might have noticed how everyone had settled into themselves, how shoulders were relaxed, how voices were low, how even the silence felt friendly. But no one paused. There was no reason to. This was just another morning identical to countless others. And that was the lie comfort sometimes tells, that because something has always been this way, it will remain untouched. That peace once established cannot be interrupted. Inside the diner, no one sensed how close that peace was to breaking. At a small table near the far corner, a man sat alone with a mug of black coffee, resting untouched in front of him. He wore simple clothes, a dark jacket worn soft at the elbows, boots dusted from travel. His posture was relaxed, almost forgettable, as if he were part of the furniture rather than a presence meant to be noticed. Most people didn't look twice at him, and that suited him just fine. He watched the room without staring. Not in curiosity and not in judgment, just awareness. The way the retired men laughed quietly at something only they understood. The way the trucker rubbed his neck, easing tension, earned mile by mile. The way the owner wiped the counter again, even though it was already clean. These small human details mattered more than noise ever did. The man's coffee slowly cooled, thin wisps of steam fading into the air. He didn't rush to drink it. He had nowhere urgent to be. Mornings like this were meant to be observed, not hurried through. Places like this reminded him of something simple and important. That dignity lived in ordinary moments. That peace did not need to announce itself. Outside, a car passed too fast, its engine briefly cutting through the quiet before disappearing down the road. Inside, no one reacted. The diner absorbed the sound and returned to stillness. The rhythm continued unbroken. There was nothing remarkable happening. No raised voices, no tension. No reason for anyone to feel on edge, just a room full of people sharing warmth, routine, and silence when words were unnecessary. The man took a slow breath and wrapped his hands around the mug, feeling its warmth seep into his palms. For now, everything was as it should be. The morning held steady. Calm lingered in every corner. And no one, not even him yet, knew how quickly that calm would be tested. Margaret had been on her feet since before sunrise. By the time the first rays of morning light slipped through the diner blinds, her body already carried the dull ache of a day that felt longer than it should have. She moved carefully, not slowly, but with the kind of precision that came from knowing exactly how much energy she could afford to spend. Every step mattered. Every motion was measured. Her uniform was clean, freshly pressed at home the night before, though the fabric had thinned with age. The pale blue dress had been washed hundreds of times, the color softened from years of use. The apron tied around her waist bore faint stains that never quite came out, no matter how hard she scrubbed. Her shoes were practical black and worn at the heels, offering just enough support to get her through another shift, but never enough to make the pain disappear. By mid-morning, her feet would burn. By afternoon, her knees would stiffen. She accepted it without complaint. Margaret wore her hair pulled back neatly, strands of gray woven through the brown she no longer tried to hide. There was a time she might have cared more about that. Now it felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Her face held the quiet lines of someone who had smiled through years of strain. Not the kind of smile that came from joy, but the kind that came from responsibility. The kind that said she would keep going whether she felt like it or not. She had worked at the diner for over a decade, long enough to memorize the habits of its regulars. Who liked extra cream? Who wanted their bacon crisp? Who preferred to be left alone in the mornings? She knew these things because paying attention was part of doing the job well, and doing the job well was how she survived. Rent did not wait. Bills did not pause. Life did not slow down just because she was tired. At home, an envelope of medical statements sat unopened on her kitchen table. She already knew what they said. Numbers that never seemed to shrink. Prescriptions that grew more expensive every year. And then there was her son, 17 tall, trying not to ask for things he knew she struggled to provide. School fees, shoes that wore out too fast, the quiet hope in his eyes that she tried not to disappoint. Margaret did not talk about these things at work. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for sympathy. Most people didn't see any of it anyway. To them, she was just the waitress who refilled coffee and asked how their morning was going. Invisible in the way service workers often were, seen only when something went wrong. Still, she smiled, not because she felt cheerful, but because smiling made interactions smoother. Because kindness, even when forced, often prevented worse behavior. Because she had learned that the world was gentler to people who appeared agreeable even when they were exhausted. It was a form of armor she wore without thinking. As she moved between tables, balancing plates and mugs with practiced ease, Margaret told herself the same thing she always did. Just get through the morning. Just keep moving. Strength for her was not loud or dramatic. It lived in endurance, in showing up again and again, even when every part of her wanted rest. And she had no idea how close she was to being tested in ways endurance alone could not solve. Margaret moved through the diner as if guided by instinct rather than thought. She reached for a coffee pot before a cup was empty, slid plates onto tables without clatter, and remembered orders without needing to write them down. Years of repetition had shaped her into someone efficient and quiet, someone who took up as little space as possible. She had learned that being unobtrusive made work easier. It kept tension low. It kept customers satisfied. It kept her employed. She greeted each table with the same gentle tone, even when her throat felt dry and her back protested every step. Mornings, she would say, voice soft but steady. "Can I get you anything else?" The words came automatically practiced until they felt almost separate from her thoughts. Some customers responded kindly. Others barely acknowledged her presence. Both reactions were familiar. Neither surprised her anymore. There was a time when Margaret had imagined her life differently. Years ago, she had worked fewer hours. She had cooked real dinners at home. She had laughed more easily. But life had narrowed around her responsibilities little by little until her world became smaller and heavier. She adapted because she had no choice. Adapting was what kept things from falling apart. She rarely sat down during her shifts. Even when there was a lull, she found something to do. Wipe a counter, refill napkin holders, straighten chairs that were already straight. Standing still gave her body time to notice how tired it was, and she couldn't afford that. Motion was a distraction. Motion was survival. Margaret understood people better than most. She could read moods in the way someone held a menu or tapped their fingers against a table. She knew when to speak and when to stay quiet. She had learned that many people came into the diner carrying frustrations they couldn't express anywhere else. She absorbed small bits of that frustration daily, letting it pass through her without resistance. It wasn't fair, but it was manageable. Or at least it had been so far. She had been spoken down to before, snapped at, blamed for things beyond her control. Those moments stung, but they were brief. They passed. She could handle them. What she feared more than anger was humiliation. Being made small in front of others, being turned into an object rather than a person. That was something she quietly dreaded, even if she never named it. Still, she trusted the diner, trusted its walls, its regulars, its rhythm. Places like this usually protected people like her, not actively, not loudly, but through familiarity and unspoken rules. People behaved here because this space asked them to. It reminded them gently how to be human. As Margaret carried a tray back toward the kitchen, she allowed herself a small moment of pride. She was doing her job well. She always did. No matter how tired she felt, no matter how much she carried home with her, at the end of the day, she showed up. That counted for something. It had to. She adjusted her apron, took a steadying breath, and turned back toward the dining room. Another table needed attention. Another order needed taking. Another smile needed offering. She did not know that the kindness she relied on was about to be tested. She did not know that endurance alone would soon not be enough. Margaret paused briefly near the counter, resting one hand against its cool surface, as if borrowing strength from it. The moment was small, almost invisible, but it mattered. Her legs trembled just enough to remind her how long she had been standing. She breathed in the familiar scent of coffee and grease and steadied herself before moving again. She thought of her son, waiting at home, still asleep, his backpack leaning against the wall by the door. She pictured the way he pretended not to notice when she counted change at the grocery store, the way he said he did not need new shoes yet. Those thoughts fueled her more than rest ever could. Quitting was not an option. Slowing down was not an option. Responsibility did not negotiate. Margaret straightened her shoulders and stepped back onto the floor. Her smile returned gentle and automatic, worn smooth by years of practice. To the people around her, she looked capable, composed, unremarkable. That was how she preferred it. Being noticed often invited questions she did not have the energy to answer. She carried plates past the far corner table where a quiet man sat alone, his attention focused on the room rather than his coffee. She did not recognize him, but something about his stillness registered briefly before she moved on. There was no time to linger. There never was. The diner continued its slow rhythm around her. Cups clinked, voices murmured, the clock ticked on. Margaret moved within it all, like a steady current, unseen but essential. This was her place in the world, at least for now. She did not know that in a few moments the weight she carried would become visible to everyone. She did not know the calm she trusted was fragile, yet morning remained gentle. In the far corner of the diner, away from the windows and foot traffic, a man sat alone at a small table that most customers overlooked. He had chosen it deliberately, not because it offered the best view, but because it offered distance. From there, he could see everything without being seen himself. His back rested lightly against the wall, posture relaxed, unguarded, as if he had been there many times before, even if he hadn't. He wore a plain, dark jacket, the kind softened by years of use rather than fashion. Beneath it, a simple shirt. His jeans were faded at the knees. His boots carried faint traces of dust, suggesting travel movement, a life lived mostly between places rather than rooted in one. A baseball cap sat low on his head, its brim angled just enough to keep his eyes shaded without fully hiding his face. To anyone passing by, he looked ordinary, intentionally so. A mug of black coffee sat in front of him untouched for longer than most people would allow. Steam rose briefly, then thinned, curling into the air before disappearing. He didn't rush to drink it. He rarely rushed anything. He had learned long ago that moments revealed themselves best when left undisturbed. No one recognized him. That was the point. He ordered like everyone else, spoke, softly paid attention, and took up as little space as possible. Fame had taught him the value of quiet, of places where expectations fell away. In this diner, he wasn't a name or a headline. He was just another man passing through, and he guarded that anonymity carefully. His eyes moved slowly around the room, not lingering too long on any one person. He watched without intrusion. The retired men by the window, their laughter restrained but genuine. The trucker rolling his shoulders, easing stiffness, earned from hours behind a wheel. The owner behind the counter repeating small tasks that kept the morning smooth. He noticed Margaret, too, the way she moved with purpose, the way she smiled even when her body seemed heavy. He noticed things most people missed, not because he tried to, but because paying attention had become instinct. He did not judge what he saw. There was no sense of comparison in him, no measuring of worth, just recognition. He understood these quiet spaces, understood the unspoken agreements that kept them peaceful. Everyone here had come to be left alone, or to feel briefly connected without obligation. It was a fragile balance, but one he respected deeply. The man remained still while the diner moved around him. Plates passed. Chairs shifted. Voices rose and fell. He adjusted his grip on the mug once, feeling the warmth against his palms, then set it back down. He breathed evenly, unhurried. Nothing about his presence demanded attention, yet there was a steadiness to him that felt anchored like a fixed point amid gentle motion. He had been in many places like this over the years, places where people gathered not to impress but to exist. He valued them because they reminded him of something simple and easily lost. That dignity did not require an audience. That decency often lived in silence. For now he was content to remain unnoticed, to observe, to let the morning unfold as it always had. He had no intention of standing out, no desire to interrupt the calm that filled the room. But calm, he knew, was not permanent. It was something that asked to be protected even if no one realized it yet. He had learned over years spent in public view that the loudest presence was rarely the strongest one. Attention was a kind of gravity. Once it locked onto you, it pulled everything else out of balance. That was why he chose corners, why he dressed plainly, why he spoke only when necessary. Anonymity was not an accident for him. It was a discipline. From his seat, he could feel the diner's rhythm the way some people felt music, the steady cadence of footsteps behind the counter, the subtle pause before a refill, the way conversations dipped when someone stood to leave, then rose again once the door closed. These patterns mattered. They told him when a place was healthy, when people felt safe enough to be themselves without performance. He took a slow sip of his coffee at last. It was strong and uncomplicated, just the way he liked it. No sugar, no cream, nothing to soften it. The heat spread through his chest, grounding him. He set the mug down carefully, aligning it with the edge of the table. Small habits learned over time gave shape to stillness. His gaze returned to Margaret as she passed by again, balancing plates with quiet efficiency. He noticed the slight stiffness in her walk, the way she shifted her weight between steps. He noticed how her smile appeared before her eyes caught up with it, a fraction of a second delay that spoke of effort. He did not pity her. Pity was easy and useless. What he felt was respect, for endurance, for showing up, for carrying weight without complaint. He had met people like her all over the world, not famous, not celebrated, people whose strength never made headlines because it was not dramatic. It was constant. It held families together. It kept places like this alive. Without them, the world would feel hollow no matter how loud it became elsewhere. The man leaned back slightly in his chair, listening without focusing on any single conversation. He let the room exist around him, let the silence between sounds settle. This was how he stayed present without being intrusive, how he remained aware without imposing himself on the moment. He had no expectation that anyone would notice him. That was the gift of places like this. He could sit with his thoughts, with the faint hum of humanity around him, and simply be. There was no pressure to perform kindness or restraint. It either lived inside you or it didn't. Outside, a truck engine roared briefly, then faded into the distance. Inside, no one reacted. The diner absorbed the noise and returned to equilibrium. He appreciated that, places that could do that, places that didn't flinch at every disruption. He rested his forearms lightly on the table and looked around once more. The retired men were smiling. The couple by the window leaned closer together. The owner laughed quietly at something someone said. Everything felt balanced, intact. Moments like this were fragile in ways most people never considered. They depended on unspoken agreements, on basic decency, on the assumption that everyone would follow the same rules of respect, even if those rules were never written down. The man had seen what happened when those assumptions failed. He had seen how quickly calm could fracture, how easily cruelty could enter a space that wasn't prepared to stop it. For now, though, nothing was wrong. The diner remained ordinary, safe, predictable. And so he stayed where he was, unnoticed, patient, and quietly attentive, unaware of how soon that patience would be tested. He did not come here looking for trouble. He rarely did. Most days he preferred to move through the world without leaving marks, without altering the shape of a room. Sitting quietly listening, observing that, was enough. It reminded him that life existed beyond stages and screens, beyond expectations placed on a name. The diner asked nothing of him, and he appreciated that. No one watched his hands, no one waited for him to speak. He could sit with his coffee and let the morning be exactly what it was: ordinary, honest, human. He noticed how people softened here, shoulders lowered, voices dropped. Even silence felt shared rather than empty. These were small signals, but they mattered. They told him that the space was working, that people trusted it. He trusted it too, at least for now. He trusted that respect would hold, that no one would test the limits of this quiet understanding, that everyone would leave one another intact. He glanced once toward the door as it opened and closed again, letting in a brief rush of cool air. Nothing changed. The rhythm resumed. He took another sip of coffee, slower this time, and set the mug down. If something were to happen, he knew he would feel it before he saw it. Disruption always announced itself first as imbalance. A pause where there should not be one. A tension in the air that refused to settle. For now there was none of that. Just the low hum of an ordinary morning continuing as it always had. He remained seated unnoticed, content to let the world pass by. He did not yet know that this peace was temporary. Soon the calm would fracture, and choices made in silence would echo far beyond this unassuming diner that morning alone. The door flew open with a sharp clang that cut cleanly through the diner's gentle rhythm. The bell above it rang louder than usual, not because it was broken, but because the door had been shoved with force instead of pushed with care. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of exhaust and impatience, and for the first time that morning several heads turned at once. A teenage boy stepped inside as if he expected the room to adjust itself around him. He was tall, lean, dressed in expensive streetwear that still held the stiffness of new fabric. His hoodie bore a designer logo large enough to be recognized from across the room. His sneakers were spotless, their bright soles squeaking faintly against the checkered floor with each careless step. He wore confidence the way others wore armor, loudly and without subtlety. His phone was already pressed to his ear. He spoke into it without lowering his voice, his words tumbling out fast and sharp, filled with irritation and casual arrogance. He laughed once, a short, dismissive sound, as if whoever was on the other end existed only to affirm him. As he walked farther in, he did not look around to take in the diner. He scanned it instead, eyes flicking over faces with quick judgment, not curiosity. To him, everyone else was background. The door swung shut behind him, and the warmth of the diner slowly reclaimed the space, but the calm did not return with it. Something had shifted. The easy balance that had filled the room moments earlier tightened, subtle but unmistakable. Conversations faltered. A spoon paused halfway to a cup. The retired men by the window exchanged a brief glance before looking back down at their table. The boy stopped near the center of the diner, still talking into his phone, his free hand gesturing sharply as if punctuating his annoyance. He rolled his eyes at something said on the call, then laughed again, louder this time. The sound carried cutting against the low murmur of the room. He did not notice or care. He moved toward an empty booth with the assumption that it belonged to him now. He slid into the seat without checking whether it had been recently cleared, tossing himself back with careless ease. His legs stretched out, blocking the aisle slightly, forcing Margaret to adjust her path as she passed. He did not acknowledge her. His eyes never left the screen of his phone. Up close, the entitlement was harder to ignore. It sat in the way he leaned back, chest open, shoulders loose, as if nothing in the world could possibly threaten him. This was not confidence earned through effort or experience. It was inherited, reinforced by years of never being corrected. It showed in his posture, in the way he occupied space without apology. He ended his call abruptly, not with a goodbye, but by tapping the screen and dropping the phone onto the table. The sound was sharp, deliberate. He exhaled loudly, as if the inconvenience of being here offended him. His gaze drifted around the diner again, slower this time, lips curling faintly at the edges. The place did not impress him. That much was clear. Margaret felt the shift before she fully understood it. The air felt heavier, like a pressure change before a storm. She adjusted her apron and took a steadying breath, preparing herself to approach. She had served people like him before, though rarely this young. They were usually louder, more unpredictable. From the far corner, the quiet man with the black coffee noticed the boy immediately. Not because of the noise, but because of what followed it. The subtle tightening of the room, the way the diner's easy rhythm stumbled just slightly off beat. The peace had not shattered yet, but it had been disturbed, and the boy, still lounging in the booth as if he owned the place, had no idea how much attention he had already drawn. The boy leaned back farther into the booth, stretching his arms along the top of the seat as if claiming territory. His gaze drifted lazily across the diner again, this time lingering just long enough to communicate disdain. The worn booths, the scratched tables, the people who looked like they belonged here. None of it impressed him. None of it mattered. He pulled his phone back into his hand and began scrolling, thumb moving quickly, attention fractured but loud. Every few seconds, he snorted or smirked at something on the screen, reacting as if the rest of the room were an audience meant to notice his amusement. The sound of his sneakers squeaked again as he shifted his feet onto the opposite seat soles, pressing against the vinyl without concern. He did not ask if that was acceptable. He assumed it was. A woman at the counter glanced over briefly, then looked away. The trucker's shoulders stiffened, though he said nothing. The retired men fell silent, their conversation fading into an uneasy pause. The diner had absorbed many kinds of people over the years, but this presence felt different, sharper, less willing to adapt. Margaret approached the booth with a practiced calm. She carried herself the same way she always did, shoulders, relaxed expression, neutral and polite. As she reached the table, she waited a moment for the boy to look up. He didn't. His eyes stayed glued to his phone, his fingers tapping rapidly, as if he were in the middle of something far more important than the person standing in front of him. She cleared her throat gently. "Good morning," she said, her voice warm but restrained. "What can I get you today?" The boy did not respond right away. He continued scrolling, smirk, deepening, then finally glanced up with a look of mild annoyance, as if she had interrupted him rather than the other way around. His eyes flicked to her face, and then away again, already bored. He gestured vaguely toward the menu without touching it. Just bring whatever he said, tone flat and dismissive, and make it quick. Margaret nodded, even though the words stung. She had heard worse. She always did what the job required. "Coffee?" she asked, keeping her voice even. He scoffed lightly. "Yeah, whatever." She turned to leave, but as she did, he added something under his breath, not loud enough to be clearly heard, but loud enough to be felt. A remark edged with mockery. Margaret pretended not to notice. She walked away, her steps steady, though the familiar tightness formed in her chest. The boy leaned back again, satisfied with himself. He drummed his fingers against the table, glancing around as if daring someone to react. No one did. The silence seemed to amuse him. To him, it felt like confirmation, like power. From the far corner, the quiet man watched without moving. His expression remained unchanged, but his focus sharpened. He had seen this posture before. The careless sprawl, the assumption of dominance, the confidence that came not from competence, but from never having faced resistance. The diner's rhythm tried to recover. A plate clinked. The clock ticked. Someone cleared their throat, but the balance was already off. The space felt smaller now, more fragile, as if everyone were unconsciously bracing for something else to happen. The boy did not notice that shift. Or perhaps he did, and enjoyed it. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes gleaming with a kind of restless energy. He was not here for food. He was here to be seen. And the diner unwillingly had begun to pay attention. Margaret returned a few moments later with a mug of coffee, setting it down carefully at the edge of the table. The boy barely glanced at it. He leaned back again, eyes roaming the room, jaw set in faint amusement, as if he were waiting for something more entertaining than breakfast to appear. The diner felt different now, quieter, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that made people aware of their own breathing. Chairs no longer shifted casually. Conversations stayed low, cautious. The ordinary warmth that had filled the room earlier seemed thinner, stretched tight. The boy lifted the mug, sniffed it with exaggerated disgust, then set it back down harder than necessary. The sound echoed just enough to draw eyes again. He smirked, clearly pleased. He had confirmed what he already believed, that he could do whatever he wanted here, and no one would stop him. From the corner table, the quiet man watched his hands, resting loosely around his cooling coffee. He did not react, not yet. He simply observed the way arrogance spread like a shadow, how quickly it changed the shape of a room. The diner was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a stage, and the boy, convinced the spotlight belonged to him, had no idea how close he was to crossing a line he would not be able to step back from. Margaret returned to the booth with the menu held neatly in both hands, even though she already knew he hadn't touched the one on the table. She stopped at a respectful distance and waited a second, giving him the chance to acknowledge her presence. He didn't. His attention remained fixed on his phone, thumb scrolling, jaw moving slightly as if chewing on irritation. She spoke anyway. "Are you ready to order, or would you like a few more minutes?" Her voice was calm, practiced, carrying none of the tension she already felt tightening in her chest. He sighed loudly, exaggerated, as if the question itself were an inconvenience. Without looking up, he flicked the menu open with one finger, glanced at it for less than a second, then snapped it shut. "This place really still does food like this," he said, half to her, half to no one in particular. "It's like a museum." Margaret held her expression steady. She had heard jokes like that before. She chose not to respond to the insult, only nodded slightly. "What would you like?" He cut her off mid-sentence. "Just bring me whatever doesn't look like it came out of a freezer. And don't mess it up." The words landed heavier than they should have. Not because they were new, but because of how casually they were delivered, as if carelessness toward her were normal, expected. Margaret felt the familiar urge to explain, to soften the moment with politeness, but she stopped herself. Explaining never helped. It only invited more. "Would you like fries or—" she began. "I said just bring it," he snapped, finally looking up. His eyes skimmed her face without settling, already moving on. "You people always overcomplicate things." The phrase stung more than the tone. You people. As if she belonged to a category rather than a life. Margaret nodded again, even though her jaw tightened slightly. She wrote nothing down. She didn't need to. Her memory was sharp, her pride quieter. As she turned away, he added, "And make it fast. I don't have all day." She walked back toward the kitchen, shoulders, straight steps even. To anyone watching, she looked unchanged. Inside, something pressed deeper. These were small moments, almost forgettable on their own. But they stacked, one after another, each interruption, each dismissal, each reminder that to him she was not a person worth basic courtesy. Around the diner, the tension thickened. The retired men had stopped talking. The trucker stared into his coffee, longer than necessary. No one said anything. No one challenged the boy. Silence settled in, heavy and complicit. From the far corner, the quiet man watched. He did not shift in his seat. He did not frown or tense. He simply observed the exchange with a still focus, taking in the tone, the posture, the imbalance. He saw the way Margaret absorbed the disrespect without protest. He saw how easily it came to the boy. He did nothing. Not yet. Margaret reached the counter and took a breath she hoped no one noticed. She repeated the order to the cook, her voice steady, then turned back toward the dining room. She told herself the same thing she always did. Finish the task. Keep moving. Don't let it show. But the room no longer felt ordinary. Something had shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. And the boy lounging in his booth mistook that silence for permission. Margaret returned to the table a moment later with a glass of water, setting it down gently beside the untouched coffee. The boy glanced at it, then at her, his expression flattening into mild irritation, as if she had placed the wrong object in the wrong universe. "I didn't ask for that," he said, pushing the glass an inch away with 2 fingers. "It comes with the meal," Margaret replied quietly. "Not defensive, not apologetic, just factual." He scoffed. "Figures." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, now eyes narrowing as he looked at her more directly than before. Not to see her, but to measure how much control he had. His gaze lingered just long enough to be uncomfortable, then drifted away again as if she were already boring him. "You know," he said, tapping the menu with 1 fingernail, "places like this don't usually last. Surprised you're still open." Margaret felt the comment land where it was meant to. Not on the diner, on her, on people like her. She nodded once, a small acknowledgement without agreement. "We do our best," she said. He laughed under his breath. "Yeah, I can tell." The laugh wasn't loud, but it was sharp. It carried. A few heads turned again quickly this time, then turned away just as fast. The room seemed to shrink further, the walls pressing in as if listening. Margaret straightened slightly. "Your food will be out shortly," she said, already preparing to step away. He raised a hand, stopping her mid-turn. "Hold on. You sure you even got the order right?" His tone was mocking, but his eyes were alert now, engaged. "I don't feel like sending it back." "I understand," Margaret said evenly. "Do you?" he asked, tilting his head. "Because it doesn't really seem like it." He shook his head, smirking to himself, and waved her off with a flick of his wrist. "Just go. Oh, and hurry." Margaret walked away without another word. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached the counter, but she pressed them flat against the cool surface until the feeling passed. She had learned how to do that, how to steady herself without drawing attention, how to swallow reactions before they escaped. The boy leaned back again, satisfied. He picked up his phone, scrolling, then began narrating something quietly into it, muttering comments under his breath. Not loud enough to clearly hear, but loud enough to suggest he wanted to be. His confidence fed on the room's restraint. The diner remained silent. No one intervened. No one spoke up. The imbalance grew heavier with every passing second. From the corner table, the quiet man continued to watch. His posture did not change. His hands remained relaxed around his mug, but his attention was fixed now, sharper than before. He noticed the way the boy spoke over Margaret, the way he interrupted, the way he tested boundaries in small, calculated ways. He understood this pattern. Cruelty rarely announced itself all at once. It crept forward disguised as confidence, waiting to see how much it could take before being stopped. Margaret returned to the kitchen, focusing on the order, on the process, on anything but the tightening feeling in her chest. She had endured worse days. She told herself this was no different, but the room knew better. The tension was no longer subtle. It sat openly now, heavy and unresolved, waiting for what would come next. When Margaret returned with the plate a few minutes later, she carried it the same way she always did. Steady hands, careful steps, eyes focused on the table rather than the person waiting there. The food was arranged neatly, exactly as ordered, steam rising faintly from the surface. She set it down gently, aligning the plate with the edge of the table. The boy glanced at it for a moment, then looked up at her with thin amusement. He did not thank her. He did not acknowledge the effort. Instead, he leaned back slightly and shook his head. "This," he said. "That's what you call food." Margaret felt the words settle into her chest. She did not respond. She waited, posture neutral, giving him space to continue or finish. He seemed pleased by her silence. He poked at the food with his fork, inspecting it as if it were contaminated. Unbelievable, he muttered loud enough for the nearby booths to hear. You people really don't care, do you? The phrase landed again. You people. Margaret swallowed and forced her shoulders to remain relaxed. She had learned that reacting only gave people like him more fuel. Let me know if you'd like something different, she said quietly. He laughed softly, a sound without warmth. Yeah, I'll let you know. She turned away, heart beating faster now, and walked back toward the counter. Behind her, the boy's laughter lingered, mixing with the low hum of the diner, like something sour in the air. No one spoke. No one moved to help. The room felt suspended, as if everyone sensed that this was no longer just about bad manners. Something else was forming. Something heavier. From the far corner, the quiet man watched Margaret retreat, saw the tension in her back, the way she carried herself through it. He noted the boy's posture, the ease with which he dismissed her humanity. Still, he did not stand, but his attention never wavered. Margaret had taken only a few steps away from the booth when she heard the sound. It was not loud at first, just a sharp, deliberate noise that did not belong in the gentle rhythm of the diner. She turned back instinctively, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. The boy had leaned forward over the table, his face twisted in exaggerated disgust. He stared down at the plate as if it had personally offended him. Then, without warning, he spat directly into the food. The sound was wet and unmistakable. A few nearby customers gasped, the reaction sharp and involuntary. Someone whispered something under their breath. A chair scraped faintly as a patron shifted. Margaret froze. For a fraction of a second, she could not move. Her eyes dropped to the plate, then lifted slowly to the boy's face, as if hoping she had misunderstood what she had just seen. Her heart thudded hard against her ribs. She felt heat rush to her cheeks, then drain away just as quickly, leaving her lightheaded. The boy watched her reaction closely. He enjoyed this part. With a casual shove of his palm, he pushed the plate toward the edge of the table. It tipped, hesitated for half a second, then slid off completely. The dish shattered against the floor at Margaret's feet. Food scattered across the tile, splattering near her shoes. The sound echoed. Margaret flinched despite herself. Her hands clenched at her sides, then relaxed again as she forced control back into her body. She did not cry out. She did not raise her voice. Years of practice took over. She bent slightly, instinct telling her to clean the mess before it became worse. Before she could move, the boy laughed. It was loud, sharp, and triumphant. He leaned back in the booth and reached for his phone, lifting it with practiced ease. The camera lens pointed directly at Margaret as she stood there stunned, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed somewhere, just past him. "Look at this," he said, his voice carrying clearly now. "This is what passes for service around here." He began narrating, speaking into the phone as if addressing an invisible audience. He mocked the food, mocked the diner, mocked her. He tilted the camera slightly, making sure her face was in frame, her shock captured cleanly. Margaret felt herself shrink under the weight of it, not physically, but emotionally. Being insulted was one thing, being turned into contempt was another. This was not anger. This was performance. He wanted witnesses. He wanted validation. Around the diner, silence thickened. A woman near the counter covered her mouth. The trucker's jaw tightened. The retired men stared openly now, disbelief etched across their faces. No one spoke. No one seemed to know how. Margaret straightened slowly. She swallowed hard and forced her voice to work. "Sir," she said quietly, "please stop recording." The boy grinned wider. Why, he asked. "I'm just being honest." From the far corner, the quiet man watched the moment crystallize. He saw the shift. The instant when cruelty stopped pretending to be casual and became deliberate. He did not move yet, but the room no longer felt merely tense. It felt violated. The boy leaned forward again, bringing the phone closer to Margaret's face, adjusting the angle with small, deliberate movements. He wanted the shot just right. He wanted her discomfort clear, her hesitation, the way her eyes flickered as she tried to decide what to do next. This was no longer about food. It was about control. Margaret stood very still. She felt every eye in the diner on her now, not with judgment, but with shock. That awareness pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe evenly. Her training told her to de-escalate, to apologize, to remove herself. But something about the phone, about being turned into a spectacle, held her in place. The boy laughed again, louder than before. "This is unreal," he said to the camera. "You see this? She doesn't even know what to do. That's what happens when you work somewhere like this." He tilted the phone downward, briefly capturing the broken plate and scattered food at her feet, then angled it back up toward her face. His grin widened, fed by the silence around him. Margaret's fingers twitched at her sides. She fought the instinct to step back, to flee. She had cleaned up worse messes. She had endured harsher words. But this felt different. This felt like being stripped of dignity in front of strangers who were powerless to stop it. She lowered her gaze and bent carefully at the waist, reaching toward the floor to begin cleaning the mess. It was not submission. It was habit. Years of doing the job had trained her body to respond before pride had a chance to speak. The boy scoffed. "There you go," he said into the phone. "On your hands and knees, exactly where this service belongs." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the diner. Someone muttered a protest too quiet to matter. The owner stiffened behind the counter, hands gripping the edge, eyes darting between Margaret and the boy, calculating consequences he should not have had to consider. Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for a napkin to gather the fallen food. She focused on the floor tiles, on the familiar pattern, on anything but the lens pointed at her. Her face burned, but she forced herself not to cry. She would not give him that. The boy shifted in his seat, clearly pleased. He raised his voice, narrating every movement. "Look how slow this is," he said. "No wonder places like this go out of business." From the corner table, the quiet man's grip tightened slightly around his mug. It was subtle, almost invisible, but his gaze hardened attention locked fully now on the scene unfolding. He took in the boy's words, the way he framed them for an audience, the way he exploited Margaret's restraint. He had seen cruelty before, but this was something else. This was humiliation curated for applause. Margaret finished gathering the broken pieces and stood slowly clutching the napkin in her hands. She lifted her eyes again, her expression controlled, but wounded. "Please," she said, barely above a whisper, "stop." The boy only laughed. The diner's silence deepened, stretching thin and brittle. And something in the room shifted again, this time unmistakably, as patience began to run out. The boy shifted his phone again, clearly enjoying the attention he had forced into the room. He zoomed in on Margaret's face, then pulled back laughing, as if he were hosting a show rather than humiliating a human being. His voice grew louder, more theatrical, feeding off the tension. "This is priceless," he said. "You see this? This is why you don't end up working in places like this." Margaret stood there, holding the napkin filled with broken food and ceramic. Her fingers felt numb now, as if the sensation had retreated somewhere deep inside her chest. She heard his words, but they seemed to arrive muffled, distorted by the pounding in her ears. She kept her shoulders straight, even as something inside her folded inward. She glanced briefly toward the counter, hoping for direction, for support, for someone to intervene. The owner met her eyes for half a second, his face tight with conflict and fear. Then he looked away. The message was clear, though it was never spoken. She was alone in this. The boy noticed the exchange and smiled wider. He narrated it too. "Look at that," he said into the phone. "Even the boss knows this place is a joke." A low murmur spread through the diner. Discomfort turned into something heavier. A woman near the window shook her head slowly. The trucker clenched his jaw hands, curling into fists on the table. Still, no one stood. Margaret took a slow breath and turned slightly, intending to step away to put distance between herself and the camera. The boy leaned forward, blocking her path with his extended leg, making sure she stayed in frame. The movement was deliberate, calculated. "Don't go yet," he said. "People need to see this." That was the moment something broke. Not in Margaret. She remained standing, but in the room itself. The silence changed shape, no longer frozen, but strained, stretched too far. The air felt thick, charged, as if the diner were holding its breath. From the far corner, the quiet man set his mug down gently. The sound was small, almost unnoticeable, but it was enough. Margaret stood trembling, dignity held together by sheer will, while the boy continued recording, unaware that the audience he was about to face was no longer on his phone, and that the performance he had started was about to end. The diner did not erupt. It did not shout or move or rush forward. Instead, it went still in a way that felt heavier than noise. The kind of stillness that pressed down on everyone at once, settling into shoulders and chests, making each breath feel deliberate. At the booth near the window, the mechanic lowered his gaze to the table. His hands, rough and stained from years of work, curled slowly around his coffee mug. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his cheek, but he did not stand. He told himself it wasn't his place, that stepping in might make things worse, that he had his own problems to worry about. The thoughts came quickly layered one over another until they formed a wall thick enough to hide behind. Across the aisle, the young couple stopped eating. The woman reached for the man's hand under the table, gripping it tightly. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent exchange of shared discomfort and fear. He gave the smallest shake of his head, not in disagreement but in warning. Not now, not here. They stayed seated, hearts racing, hoping someone else would act first. Behind the counter, the owner stood, frozen. His fingers dug into the edge of the countertop, knuckles whitening as he stared at the scene unfolding. He had built this place with borrowed money and long hours. One complaint, one lawsuit, one phone call to the wrong person could undo everything. He knew the type of family boys like that came from. Influence, lawyers, problems that did not end cleanly. He hated himself for thinking that way, but fear spoke louder than conscience. Margaret knelt slowly near the booth, careful with her movements, as if sudden motion might provoke another outburst. Her hands trembled as she gathered the broken plate and spilled food, folding napkins over sharp edges to protect her fingers. She focused on the task, on the simple mechanics of cleaning, because it was easier than acknowledging the room watching her do it. The silence wrapped around her. No one spoke her name. No one told the boy to stop. The absence of voices was louder than his insults. It told her something she did not want to hear, that people saw what was happening, that they felt it was wrong, and that they were choosing collectively to let it continue. Her throat tightened. She kept her eyes on the floor, blinking hard to keep tears from falling. Crying would give him satisfaction. Crying would make this worse. She forced her breathing to slow, counting silently as she wiped the mess away. The boy noticed the room's stillness and mistook it for approval. His laughter grew sharper, more confident. He angled his phone higher, making sure the faces in the background were visible. Proof, he would tell himself later, that no one had stopped him. From the far corner, the quiet man watched without moving. His posture remained relaxed, but the energy around him had changed. What had once been calm attention was now focused, precise, and alert. He saw every glance turned away, every hesitation, every excuse forming behind lowered eyes. The room was not filled with bad people. It was filled with ordinary ones, people who meant well, people who believed in kindness, people who in this moment were failing it. And the weight of that failure hung in the air thick and unresolved as the line drew closer. Margaret finished gathering the larger pieces of the broken plate and folded the napkin carefully, as if neatness might restore something that had been damaged. She rose slowly, joints stiff, and carried the mess toward the counter. Her steps were measured, controlled, the way they always were. To anyone watching, she looked composed. Only she knew how much effort it took to keep her hands from shaking. As she passed the nearby tables, she felt the weight of eyes on her back. Not cruel eyes, not mocking ones. These were eyes filled with discomfort, regret, sympathy, eyes that wanted the moment to end without demanding action. A woman near the aisle gave her a tight, apologetic smile, the kind that said, "I'm sorry this is happening," without saying anything at all. Margaret returned it automatically, though it hurt more than the insults. The boy noticed those looks too. He turned his phone slowly, capturing the room, now narrating in a tone dripping with amusement. "Look at this," he said. "Everyone's so quiet. Guess they know bad service when they see it." A chair creaked as someone shifted uncomfortably. The mechanic took a long drink of his coffee, eyes fixed on the table. His foot tapped once against the floor, then stopped. He imagined standing up, imagined saying something sharp and final. He also imagined the consequences, the boy's age, his confidence, the kind of trouble that followed people who felt untouchable. The thoughts tangled, and in the end, he stayed seated. The owner swallowed hard and wiped his hands on a towel that was already clean. He considered calling the police, then dismissed the thought just as quickly. This wasn't a crime, he told himself. Just a customer being difficult. Just words. Just a mess. He hated the way that logic sounded, but fear dressed it up as practicality. Protect the business. Protect the staff later. He avoided Margaret's eyes when she reached the counter. She placed the broken pieces beneath the register and reached for a cloth to wipe her hands. Her fingers felt clumsy, numb. She kept her head down, breathing carefully, reminding herself to stay professional, to get through the shift, to not make this worse. Behind her, the boy continued talking, his voice filling the diner. "I mean, seriously, how hard is it to do your job?" he said, laughing lightly. "This is why some people never go anywhere." No one answered him, not because they agreed, but because silence felt safer than confrontation. The room had decided, without words, that the cost of speaking up was too high. From the far corner, the quiet man leaned forward slightly for the first time. It was a small movement, almost imperceptible, but it carried intention. His eyes did not leave the boy. He took in the laughter, the camera, the way Margaret's shoulders remained tight, even when she turned away. The stillness around him was no longer passive. It was coiled. The line had not yet been crossed beyond repair. But it was close. Close enough that everyone in the room could feel it, even if no one dared to say it out loud. And one man, still unnoticed by most, understood that silence had already done enough damage. Margaret wiped her hands, slowly, one finger at a time, as if grounding herself through the motion. She could still hear the boy's voice behind her, loud and careless, but she did not turn around. Turning would only invite more. She had learned that lesson long ago. Endurance meant forward motion even when every instinct told her to retreat. The diner felt smaller now. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. The familiar comfort that had once wrapped the room was gone, replaced by something brittle and uneasy. Silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt loaded, heavy with things left unsaid. A man near the door shifted in his seat, then settled again. Someone cleared their throat and stopped. A woman glanced toward the exit, calculating how quickly she could leave without drawing attention. These were not uncaring people. They were people afraid of making the wrong choice, afraid of consequences they could not predict. The boy sensed it. He always had. He leaned back, stretching, enjoying the control the room had handed him, without protest. His confidence grew with every second. No one challenged him. Silence had become his shield. Margaret returned to the dining floor, head slightly lowered, ready to continue her shift, as if nothing had happened. She carried the weight quietly, the way she always did. But something inside her had cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, just enough to hurt. From the far corner, the quiet man watched her pass. He noticed the tightness in her shoulders, the way her breath stayed shallow, the way she avoided the boy's booth by a wider margin than necessary. His stillness deepened, no longer relaxed but deliberate, focused. He looked around the diner one more time, at the people who wanted to help but did not, at the man who had mistaken fear for approval, at the woman who had done nothing wrong and was paying for it anyway. Silence had filled the room long enough. The line was no longer approaching. It was here. The boy was no longer satisfied with attention alone. Silence had fed him, but now he wanted more. He leaned forward in his booth eyes, tracking Margaret as she moved past, his mouth curling into a smile that carried no humor at all. It was the smile of someone who knew he could keep going and had no intention of stopping. "Hey," he called out, snapping his fingers once, to pull her back into his orbit. "You forgot something." Margaret stopped, slowly. Every instinct told her to keep walking, but years of training overrode instinct. She turned to face him, her expression careful, composed, already bracing. "Yes," she asked quietly. He looked her up and down in a way that felt deliberate, invasive. His gaze lingered on her uniform, on the faded fabric, on the apron she had just wiped clean. He laughed under his breath. "Wow," he said. "They really don't update the uniforms, huh? Guess this place just gave up a long time ago." A few people shifted in their seats. Someone exhaled sharply. Margaret felt heat rise in her face, but she kept her hands clasped in front of her fingers, locked together to keep them from shaking. "I'm sorry if there's a problem," she said. The words came automatically conditioned by years of diffusing situations that never should have existed. "Oh, there's a problem," he replied. "I mean, look at this place. Look at you." He reached down and pinched a small piece of leftover food from the edge of the table. He held it up between his fingers, inspecting it as if considering something amusing. Then, with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it toward her. It didn't hit her face. It struck her apron instead, leaving a faint smear before sliding to the floor. The sound was small. The impact was not. Margaret flinched despite herself. Her breath caught sharp and sudden. A ripple of quiet shock moved through the diner. The woman near the window pressed her lips together. The mechanic's chair scraped slightly as he shifted, then stopped. The boy grinned wider. "Relax," he said. "It's just food. You deal with worse than that, right?" Margaret swallowed. Her throat felt tight now, like it was closing in on itself. She bent slightly to brush at her apron, more from reflex than necessity. Her voice came out softer when she spoke again. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll clean that." The apology hung in the air, wrong and undeserved. The boy leaned back, satisfied. He raised his hand and extended his middle finger toward her, holding it there, openly daring anyone to react. A few gasps slipped out before people caught themselves. No one spoke. "You know what?" he continued, pulling his phone out again. "I think I'm done here. I don't need this." He stood halfway from the booth, loud now, performing again. "I'll just call my dad. He loves shutting places like this down. Health department, lawyers, whole thing." The owner stiffened behind the counter. Margaret felt it. The threat landed not just on her, but on the diner itself, on the people inside it, on livelihoods that depended on quiet mornings just like this. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," Margaret said quickly, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I'm sorry." Her apology was not for a mistake. It was for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. From the far corner, the quiet man finally moved. Not much, just enough. He looked down at the mug in front of him. The coffee inside had gone completely still, a thin skin forming on the surface. Cold now, forgotten. He wrapped his fingers around it once, feeling the temperature, then set it down gently on the table. The sound was soft, but the room felt it. Something shifted in the air, subtle but undeniable, like the moment before a storm breaks. The boy was still talking, still threatening, still enjoying himself. But for the first time since he walked in the diner, was no longer entirely focused on him. The line had been crossed. The boy kept talking, his voice rising with confidence, now that he had tasted real fear. He paced a step beside the booth phone, pressed to his ear, even though no one was on the line yet. He wanted the threat to land before the call ever happened. "You hear that?" he said loudly, looking around the diner. "This place is done. One call and it's over. You people don't even know who you're dealing with." Margaret stood where she was, hands folded in front of her shoulders, tight. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to stay upright. She glanced toward the counter again, then back at the floor. She knew that look, fear mixed with calculation. She had seen it on managers before, on owners who had too much to lose. "I can take care of it," she said quietly, her voice barely steady. "Please." "I'll make it right." She didn't know what right meant anymore, only that she needed this to stop, that everyone needed it to stop. The boy laughed, short and sharp. Too late for that. He raised the phone higher, turning the camera outward again, capturing the room. "This is what happens when places hire people who don't belong," he said. "They think they can just apologize their way out of anything." Margaret felt the words cut deeper than the earlier insults. She nodded once slowly, as if agreeing, though nothing about it was true. The apology came again, softer this time. "I'm sorry," she said. The room reacted all at once, not with sound, but with tension. Someone shifted hard in their seat. A breath was held, another released. The owner took a half step forward, then stopped himself. The mechanic's knuckles whitened around his mug, and in the corner, the quiet man did not look at the boy anymore. He looked at Margaret. He saw the apology for something that was not her fault. The way her dignity was being ground down in public. The way silence had taught the boy that this was acceptable. His hand rested near the mug he had just set down. His posture changed almost imperceptibly, spine straightening, shoulders aligning. He did not rush, he did not glare, but the stillness around him sharpened. The boy was still talking, still threatening, still convinced the room belonged to him. He did not notice that the center of gravity had shifted. He did not notice that the calm he had mistaken for weakness was about to answer him. The quiet man rose from his seat without urgency. There was no sudden movement, no scrape of the chair meant to draw attention. He simply stood unfolding himself from the corner as if this had always been the next step. His posture was relaxed, balanced, unthreatening. Yet the moment he straightened, the atmosphere in the diner shifted. He did not look at the boy right away. He did not speak. He took one measured step forward, then another, boots touching the checkered floor with soft certainty. The sound was barely audible, but it cut through the room more cleanly than shouting ever could. Conversations stopped completely now. Heads lifted, eyes followed him. Margaret noticed him only when he was already close. At first, she thought he was simply another customer, slipping past her to avoid the tension. Then she realized he was moving toward her, toward the boy, toward the space where humiliation had been allowed to live unchecked. He positioned himself between them without ceremony. One step, then another, until his body blocked the phone's camera entirely. The boy's screen now showed nothing but the back of a dark jacket and the edge of a baseball cap. Margaret inhaled sharply. Her instinct was immediate. She stepped back without thinking, retreating into the small pocket of space that had suddenly formed behind him. It felt strange, protective, like stepping behind a wall she hadn't known was there. The man did not turn to reassure her. He did not need to. His presence alone did that. The boy frowned at his phone, confused by the sudden obstruction. He tilted it left, then right, trying to reframe the shot. The man adjusted with him, not aggressively, not dramatically, simply staying in the way. Always centered, always calm. "What the hell?" the boy said, lowering the phone slightly and looking up for the first time. He seemed surprised, not by the interruption itself, but by the manner of it. There was no anger in the man's posture, no challenge, no visible emotion at all, just a quiet refusal to move. The boy's irritation flared quickly. He straightened, puffing his chest slightly, reclaiming the posture he wore like armor. "You mind," he said. "You're in my shot." The man did not answer. He stood there, hands at his sides, weight, evenly distributed, gaze level, but not confrontational. He was not staring the boy down. He was simply present, solid, unavoidable. Around them, the diner felt different now. The silence was no longer empty. It was attentive. The mechanic lifted his head. The young couple leaned forward slightly. Even the owner stepped out from behind the counter, drawn by the shift he could not ignore. Margaret remained just behind the man's shoulder, heart racing, unsure whether she should speak or move or apologize again. But the space in front of her felt secure in a way nothing had all morning. For the first time since the door had slammed open, she was not exposed. The boy scoffed, trying to laugh it off. "What, you some kind of hero now?" he said, gesturing vaguely with the phone. "Move, this doesn't concern you." Still no response. The man did not square his shoulders. He did not step closer. He did not threaten. He simply stayed where he was, his body doing the work his voice had not yet done. The effect was immediate and unsettling. The boy hesitated just for a fraction of a second, unsure how to react to a challenge that wasn't loud or reactive. His confidence wavered, flickering like a bad signal. He had expected shouting, anger, resistance he could mock or escalate. He had not expected stillness, and in that stillness the room held its breath, sensing that something fundamental had changed. The boy shifted his weight, annoyance sharpening into something more uncertain. He looked around, expecting support laughter, anything that would put the moment back under his control. What he found instead was attention, focused, silent, unblinking. "Hey," he said again, louder now, "I'm talking to you." The man finally lifted his eyes fully to meet him, not with anger, not with challenge, just steady presence. The kind that did not need words to establish boundaries. The boy felt it immediately, though he would never admit it. The space between them felt different from any confrontation he had known. There was no heat to push against, no emotion to provoke. Margaret stood behind the man, hands clasped tight at her waist. She realized her breathing had slowed. She had stopped apologizing. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was not the center of the room's cruelty. She was shielded by someone who had not asked her to explain herself or justify her worth. The boy lifted his phone again, angling it upward, trying to film around the man's shoulder. The man shifted half a step, subtle and precise, blocking the view without touching him. The movement was smooth, unhurried. It made the boy feel clumsy by comparison. "Are you deaf?" the boy snapped. "Move." Still nothing. A murmur stirred among the tables, not words, just breath and movement. The mechanic sat up straighter. The couple near the window let go of each other's hands, palms flattening on the table as if ready to stand if needed. The owner hovered near the counter, caught between fear and something braver struggling to surface. The boy's face flushed. He had lost the room and did not know how. His performance no longer had an audience. The man in front of him had taken that away simply by standing where he did. "This is my business," the boy insisted, voice cracking just slightly. "You don't get to tell me what to do." The man did not argue. He did not correct him. He simply remained. And in that moment, everyone understood. This was not about authority or dominance. It was about placement, about choosing where to stand when silence had already done enough harm. The boy swallowed hard, irritation colliding with confusion. He had never been stopped like this before. Not without shouting, not without violence, not without fear. The room felt steadier now, not calm, but grounded, as if the center had finally been found. And the boy, standing in front of a man who refused to move, began to realize that power did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it simply stepped in and stayed. The man finally spoke. His voice was calm, low and steady, carrying just far enough to be heard by the boy and no one else. There was no edge to it, no raised volume, no attempt to command attention from the room. "You need to stop," he said, "and you need to leave." The words landed gently. That was what made them so disorienting. The boy blinked clearly, not expecting speech to come at all, let alone in that tone. He laughed once, sharp and dismissive, as if he had misheard. "Excuse me," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Who do you think you are?" The man did not answer the question. He did not explain himself. He did not introduce his name or credentials or justify his presence. He simply repeated the request just as calmly as before. "You're harassing the staff," he said. "It ends now." There was no accusation in his voice, no judgment, just a statement of fact. The boy scoffed and lifted his phone higher, pushing it closer to the man's face, invading his space the way he had invaded Margaret's moments earlier. The screen hovered inches away, camera rolling, waiting to capture something explosive. "Oh, this is good," the boy said, grin returning. "Say that again, real slow. Let everyone see you." The man did not flinch. He did not step back. He did not glance at the phone. His eyes stayed level, focused on the boy himself, not the device in his hand. "I'm asking you to leave," he said. "That's all." The boy's smile wavered. He had expected shouting. He had expected threats. He had expected a rise in emotion he could poke at, mock twist into content. What he received instead was something far more unsettling. Refusal without anger, authority without aggression. The boy straightened, trying to reassert himself. "You can't tell me what to do," he snapped. "This isn't your place." The man nodded slightly, acknowledging the point, without conceding anything. "It's theirs," he said, eyes flicking briefly toward the counter, then back. "And you're done here." The words were still polite, still even, still immovable. Around them, the room felt different now. The silence was no longer complicit. It was watchful, expectant. People leaned forward without realizing it. The mechanic's hands loosened from his mug. The couple near the window sat straighter. Even the owner stepped closer, drawn by the way the balance had shifted. The boy felt it. He felt the room slipping away from him. His voice grew louder, in response more performative. "You hear this guy?" he said, turning the phone outward, fishing for laughs that did not come. "Thinks he's in charge." He shoved the phone closer again, nearly touching the man's shoulder. The man did not react. He did not swat the phone away. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression. He simply stayed. The stillness became unbearable for the boy. It pressed in on him, exposing the emptiness behind his bravado. He had built his confidence on reactions, on noise, on people shrinking back. Here, none of that was happening. For the first time, someone had told him no, without fear, and the ground beneath him began to shift. The boy's laughter came again, but this time it sounded thinner, forced. He waved the phone inches from the man's face, angling for a reaction that refused to arrive. "Wow," he said loudly. "You hear how calm this guy is? You some kind of monk or something." A few people shifted in their seats. No one laughed. The boy noticed. His eyes flicked around the room, searching for the easy validation that had followed him all his life. It wasn't there. The man did not answer the insult. He did not correct it. He simply spoke again, just as quietly. "This doesn't need to get worse," he said. "You can leave now." The boy's jaw tightened. The words weren't threatening yet. They felt final in a way he couldn't shake. He had been yelled at before, punished before, but he had never been dismissed so completely, so calmly, as if his performance no longer mattered, or what the boy shot back, leaning in. "What are you gonna do?" The question hung there, loaded, daring the man to reveal something violent or dramatic. It was a trap the boy knew well. Provoke, capture, control the story. The man did not take the bait. "There is no or," he replied. "This ends because it should." That answer confused the boy more than anything else. It offered no escalation, no spectacle, no villain he could point to. Just an ending that did not require his permission. He laughed again louder, turning to the room. "You people hearing this, he thinks he gets to decide." Still, no one joined in. The boy's grip on the phone tightened. He shoved it forward one more time, nearly pressing it into the man's chest. "Move," he said. "Last chance." The man glanced down briefly at the phone, then back at the boy. His expression did not change, but something settled behind his eyes. Not anger, resolve. "I'm not moving," he said. The words were simple, quiet, absolute. Margaret stood behind him, heart pounding, realizing she had stopped shrinking. She was standing taller without trying, shielded by the calm certainty in front of her. For the first time that morning, she felt like the room might hold. The boy stepped back half an inch, barely noticeable, but enough. He masked it quickly, straightening his shoulders, scoffing. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You have no idea who my father is." The man nodded once, acknowledging the threat without flinching. "That doesn't change anything," he said. The imbalance tipped. The boy felt it in his gut before his mind caught up. The power he thought he held had stopped working. His voice, once loud and controlling, now sounded hollow against the quiet resolve of a man who refused to bend. The room watched as the boy's certainty fractured, and for the first time since he walked in, he did not know what to do next. The boy's face twisted, frustration boiling over into something reckless. Calm had failed to bend. Silence had failed to frighten. The room no longer belonged to him, and he could feel it slipping away with every second the man in front of him refused to react. He glanced past the man's shoulder, eyes locking briefly on Margaret. That was when he made his choice. With a sharp, angry motion, he grabbed another piece of food from the table and hurled it forward, aiming past the man toward her. It was not thoughtful or precise. It was an act of spite, thrown in desperation, fueled by the need to hurt something. The food never reached her. It struck the man squarely in the chest, splattering against the dark fabric of his jacket before sliding down to the floor. The sound was soft, wet, final. The diner inhaled as one. Margaret gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. The owner took an involuntary step forward. A chair scraped loudly as someone half stood before catching themselves. The boy froze for a fraction of a second, surprised by the outcome of his own action. The man looked down slowly at the stain on his jacket. He studied it with mild curiosity, as if noting an inconvenience rather than an offense. Then he lifted his eyes back to the boy. Something changed, not in his expression. That remained composed, but in his focus. The stillness that had once been passive now carried direction, purpose. "That's enough," he said. The boy scoffed reflexively, masking the flicker of unease that shot through him. "What are you gonna do?" he snapped. "Cry about it." He stepped closer, invading space again, this time with his whole body. He shoved forward with his shoulder, trying to knock the man off balance to force movement where there had been none. It was clumsy, unplanned, driven by anger rather than thought. The man did not step back. Instead, he shifted. It was subtle, a change in weight, a turn of the hips, one foot sliding half an inch across the tile. The boy barely registered the movement before it happened. The man raised his arm not to strike, but to guide. He caught the boy's momentum rather than fighting it, redirecting the shove as it came. One hand found the boy's forearm, the other braced lightly against his shoulder. There was no violence in it, no forceful blow, just timing. The boy's balance betrayed him instantly. His feet tangled, his center of gravity pitched forward where there was no longer resistance to stop it. His own aggression carried him past the point of control. He stumbled. The room gasped again as the boy lurched sideways, arms flailing as he tried to recover. His sneaker skidded on the smooth tile. He reached for the table, missed, and the next moment he was falling. Hard. He hit the floor on his knees first, then his hands, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs in a sharp, humiliating grunt. His phone flew from his grip, sliding across the floor until it clattered to a stop near the counter. The man released him immediately and stepped back. He did not loom. He did not advance. He simply stood where he was, hands relaxed at his sides, watching to ensure the boy was no longer a threat. The boy stayed on the floor for a moment, stunned, not hurt badly, not injured, just shaken, winded, disoriented. And for the first time since he had entered the diner, he was lower than everyone else. On his knees. The silence that followed was different from all the others that morning. It was not fear, not complicity. It was clarity. The boy lifted his head slowly, cheeks, burning eyes darting around the room. Every face was turned toward him now, not with awe, not with anger, with recognition. His power had not been taken from him violently. He had thrown it away. The boy remained on the floor longer than he meant to, not because he was hurt, but because standing felt impossible under the weight of the moment. His palms pressed against the cold tile, fingers splayed as he tried to pull air back into his lungs. Each breath came shallow and sharp, his chest burning with more than just the impact. His phone lay several feet away, screen still glowing, camera angled uselessly at the ceiling. The live stream, if it was still running, captured nothing but fluorescent light and silence. Slowly, the boy pushed himself upright, onto his knees. The position was unavoidable now. Awkward. Exposed. He felt it immediately, the way the room seemed taller, the way every person looked down at him, whether they meant to or not. He glanced up at the man standing a few steps away. The man had already stepped back, creating space. He did not hover. He did not stare. He did not threaten. His hands rested calmly at his sides, jacket still stained, posture unchanged. The restraint was unmistakable. Everything about the movement had been controlled, intentional, Finished. Margaret stood frozen behind him, one hand pressed lightly to her chest. Her heart was racing, but something else was there too. Relief. Shock. A fragile sense of safety she hadn't allowed herself to feel all morning. Around them, the diner felt suspended. The mechanic had fully stood now, chair pushed back. The couple by the window were on their feet as well, eyes wide. Even the owner had stepped out from behind the counter, his fear overtaken by the reality in front of him. No one rushed the boy. No one shouted. That, more than anything, stripped him bare. He scrambled for words, for anger, for the threats that had always saved him before. But nothing came. His mouth opened, then closed. His throat felt tight dry. He finally forced himself up, rising unsteadily to his feet. His movements were clumsy now, rushed, his confidence shattered. He avoided looking directly at anyone, especially the man who had stopped him without laying a hand, in anger. The room did not cheer. It did not celebrate. It simply watched. And in that quiet attention, the boy understood something he had never learned before. Strength did not need permission. Control did not need noise, and arrogance, when met with restraint, had nowhere to hide. The boy stayed where he was, breath coming in short, uneven pulls. The floor beneath him felt colder now, harder than it had a moment before. His knees pressed into the tile, not by choice, but by consequence. He had not planned to be here. He had never imagined ending up like this, grounded, exposed, seen. His phone lay several feet away, face down, silent, at last. No screen to hide behind, no audience to perform for. Just the room. The diner did not rush him. No one laughed. No one clapped. No one shouted triumph or judgment. The absence of reaction was heavier than any response could have been. It left him alone with the truth of where he was and how he had gotten there. Keanu stood a short distance in front of him, feet planted, posture relaxed. He did not loom. He did not square his shoulders or tighten his fists. His body language carried no threat. He was simply present, steady, and unmoved, making sure the chaos had ended. The boy looked up at him, chest still burning, eyes wide and unfocused. For the first time since he had walked into the diner, his face held something other than arrogance or mockery. Confusion. Shock. A flicker of fear he did not know how to mask. Keanu did not meet that look with contempt. He waited. That alone was disarming. Margaret stood a few steps behind him, hands trembling at her sides. She had not moved closer. She had not spoken. But her shoulders were no longer curled inward. She watched the scene unfold with a strange mix of disbelief and quiet release. The threat that had hovered over her all morning had finally collapsed, not with shouting or punishment, but with restraint. Around them, the room felt altered. The mechanic stood rigid near his booth, eyes fixed on the boy. The couple by the window remained upright, hands no longer gripping each other in fear, but resting openly on the table. The owner hovered near the counter, heart pounding, fully aware that what he was witnessing would stay with him long after the dishes were cleared. The boy swallowed hard and tried to speak. Nothing came out at first. His throat felt tight, his mouth dry. He shifted his weight, knees scraping slightly as he adjusted, embarrassed by the sound. He was painfully aware of his position now, of how low he was, of how high everyone else felt. Keanu did not comment on it. He did not remind the boy where he was. He did not lecture him or demand an apology. He did not record the moment or invite anyone else to witness it more closely. He simply ensured the threat was over. The boy's arrogance, built on noise and intimidation, had collapsed inward. There was no dramatic reckoning, no speech, just the quiet aftermath of a storm that had spent all its force and left nothing standing. The diner remained silent, not out of fear this time, but out of understanding. This was not a victory to celebrate. It was a lesson unfolding in real time. And the boy on his knees was finally listening. Time seemed to slow for the boy as he stayed kneeling, palms resting on his thighs, breath gradually finding rhythm again. Every second stretched, forcing him to feel the weight of eyes that were no longer impressed, no longer afraid. They were simply watching, waiting for what he would do, now that the noise had failed him. Keanu shifted slightly, not closer, not farther, just enough to remain between the boy and Margaret. It was a quiet boundary drawn without words. His voice, when it came, was low and even. "It's over," he said. "Stand up slowly, then leave." There was no accusation in the instruction, no humiliation, just an exit. The boy hesitated, pride warring with instinct. Then he nodded, once small and stiff, and pushed himself to his feet. His legs shook as he rose, balance uncertain, confidence gone. He did not look at Margaret. He could not. No one mocked him as he stood. No one demanded an apology. The room did not need it. The lesson had already landed harder than words ever could. Keanu stepped back, giving space. The power in the moment came not from dominance, but from restraint. He had stopped the harm. That was enough. The boy took a step toward the door, then another. Each movement felt heavy, like walking through water. He glanced once toward the counter, then toward the people he had tried to rule with threats. None of them looked away now. They watched him leave, with clear eyes and quiet resolve. Margaret finally exhaled. Her shoulders dropped, tension releasing in a long breath she had been holding for far too long. She felt no urge to speak, no need to justify herself. Silence felt safe again. As the door opened and closed behind the boy, the diner seemed to breathe out as one. The storm had passed, not with applause, not with punishment, but with dignity restored. Keanu turned slightly toward Margaret, then meeting her eyes for the first time since he had stepped in. He gave a small nod, nothing more. It said what words did not. "You did not deserve that. It's done." She nodded back, emotion tight in her throat. The room slowly returned to itself. Chairs settled, coffee cooled, morning resumed, altered, but intact. And the boy walking away unseen carried with him something he had never known before, the weight of accountability. It would follow him long after the diner disappeared from view, lingering in the quiet moments when there was no audience, no phone, no one to impress. For the first time, he would remember being stopped without cruelty, corrected without shouting. The memory would return unexpectedly in classrooms, in lines, in conversations where confidence once came easily. He would not understand it fully yet, only that something had shifted, and that some doors close quietly, leaving behind lessons that cannot be ignored forever, shaping how he stands, how he speaks, and whether he chooses silence or restraint next time around. The boy straightened his hoodie with hands that no longer felt steady. His face burned not from pain, but from exposure. The heat crawled up his neck into his ears, settling behind his eyes. He stood there for a moment too long, as if waiting for something familiar to return. Laughter, fear, applause. Anything that would give him back the version of himself he had walked in with. Nothing came. He cleared his throat and tried to speak, the reflex automatic. Words had always been his weapon. Threats, names, connections. He opened his mouth and reached for them now. "You don't know who you just messed with," he said. But the sentence came out uneven. His voice cracked on the last word, thin and unconvincing, and the effect was immediate. The room did not flinch. No one leaned back. No one looked away. The mechanic met his eyes directly this time, not with anger, but with calm certainty. The couple by the window did the same. The woman who had shaken her head earlier now watched him with quiet clarity, seeing him for exactly what he was in this moment, a boy whose borrowed confidence had run out. The owner stood still near the counter, no longer frozen. He did not speak. He did not need to. The balance had already shifted beyond the boy's reach. The boy tried again, louder. "My dad." The words stalled halfway out of his mouth. Even he could hear how hollow they sounded now. The name he usually wielded like armor had lost its weight in this room. There was no fear left for it to land on. He looked around quickly, almost desperately searching for a face that might still take him seriously. He found none. Not ridicule, not triumph, just understanding. The kind that sees through noise and lands on truth. Keanu remained where he was, hands relaxed, body angled slightly away, now no longer even blocking the path. He had already stepped out of the conflict without leaving the space. He did not watch the boy closely. He did not need to. That indifference was not dismissal. It was closure. The boy swallowed and turned toward the door. His steps were fast but uneven urgency, pushing him forward now that performance had failed. He did not look back at Margaret. He did not look at Keanu. He kept his eyes fixed on the exit, as if afraid that one more glance might pull him apart. The bell above the door chimed as he shoved it open. The sound was sharp, sudden, cutting through the quiet like punctuation. Then he was gone. The door swung shut behind him, and the diner changed all at once. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but everyone felt it. Shoulders loosened, breaths released. The air seemed lighter, as if pressure had finally lifted from the room. No one cheered, no one clapped. There was no celebration in what had just happened. There was relief. Justice had not chased the boy down the street. It had not humiliated him in return. It had stood still, quiet and firm, until arrogance collapsed under its own weight. And that was enough. For a long moment after the door closed, no one moved. The sound of the bell lingered faintly in the air, then faded. What remained was a silence that felt different from all the others that had filled the diner that morning. This one was not tense. It was not afraid. It was settling. Margaret stood near the aisle, hands resting lightly against her apron. Her knees felt weak now that the danger had passed, as if her body was finally allowing itself to feel everything it had held back. She took a slow breath, then another. The room no longer felt hostile. It felt returned. The mechanic eased himself back into his booth, rubbing a hand over his face as if waking from something heavy. He let out a quiet breath and picked up his mug again, the coffee now cold but comforting all the same. The couple by the window sat down together, exchanging a look that carried relief and something else, too. A shared understanding that they had witnessed something that mattered. Behind the counter, the owner straightened, his shoulders lifted as though a weight had slid off them. He glanced toward Margaret, then toward the man who had stepped in, his expression filled with gratitude and something close to regret. He took a step forward, then stopped, unsure whether words were necessary. Keanu did not seek acknowledgement. He turned slightly, giving the room his back, signaling without saying it that the moment had ended. He reached for his jacket, brushing lightly at the stain left by the thrown food, more habit than concern. The mess did not seem to bother him. Margaret finally found her voice, though it came out softer than she expected. "Thank you," she said. Keanu turned just enough to meet her eyes. He did not smile. He did not shrug it off. He nodded once, a small, respectful gesture that returned her dignity rather than centering himself. She nodded back, emotion tightening her throat. There was no need to explain. No need to relive what had happened. It was over. The diner slowly resumed its rhythm. Chairs shifted, cutlery clinked, someone cleared their throat and asked for a refill. The ordinary sounds returned, tentative at first, then steadier. Morning reclaimed its place. Outside, the boy was already gone from view, his footsteps swallowed by distance and traffic. No one followed him. No one needed to. What he had lost in that room could not be recovered by running. Keanu walked back toward his booth and sat down, movements unhurried. He took a moment to look around the diner, at the people who had stayed, who had watched, who would carry this moment with them in different ways. Then he reached for his coffee. It was cold. He took a sip anyway. Across the room, Margaret picked up her order pad and returned to work. Her hands were steadier now, her posture straighter. The weight she carried had not vanished, but it had shifted. Someone had stood where silence once lived, and the diner, small and ordinary, felt a little stronger for it. For a few seconds after everything ended, Margaret did not move. She stood exactly where she was, hands resting against her apron, eyes unfocused, as if her body needed time to catch up with what her mind already knew. The danger was gone. The noise had left, but the echo of it still lingered in her chest, pulsing slowly with each breath. She inhaled carefully. Then again, her knees felt weak, not from fear now, but from release. When you hold yourself together for too long, the moment you no longer have to can feel just as overwhelming. She shifted her weight slightly, grounding herself, reminding herself where she was. The diner, the floor beneath her shoes, the smell of coffee returning to the air. Keanu turned toward her then. He did not rush. He did not crowd her space. He simply angled his body enough to face her, his presence gentle, now no longer a barrier, but an option. His voice when he spoke was quiet. "You okay?" It was not a dramatic question. It was not wrapped in concern meant to draw attention. It was simple, human. Margaret nodded once, though her throat tightened immediately. She nodded again more firmly this time, as if convincing herself as much as him. "Yes," she said. Her voice wavered slightly, then steadied. "I am. I think I am." Keanu gave a small nod in return. He did not press her. He did not ask what she needed or how she felt beyond that. He trusted her answer. That trust mattered more than words. "Thank you," she said softly. The words felt too small for what had happened, but they were all she had. They carried everything she could not yet say. Fear, relief, gratitude, the quiet shock of being seen. He accepted them without ceremony. No smile, no dismissal, just a respectful acknowledgement that let the moment belong to her, not him. Around them, the diner began to move again. The mechanic stepped forward and picked up a chair that had shifted during the chaos, setting it back in place with a careful motion. The couple by the window gathered napkins from the floor, stacking them neatly on the table. A woman near the counter wiped at a smear on the wall with a damp cloth someone handed her. No one was asked to help. They simply did. The owner approached Margaret slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. His face carried regret, unguarded and sincere. "I'm sorry," he said. "I should have stepped in sooner." Margaret looked at him, really looked at him, and nodded. She did not argue. She did not reassure him unnecessarily. She accepted the apology for what it was, a recognition. That mattered too. "It's okay," she said quietly. Not because it had been okay, but because the moment was no longer about blame. The room softened with each small act, the sharp edges of fear dulled. The silence that had once suffocated now made space for something gentler. Keanu stepped back, then giving Margaret room as the diner reclaimed itself. He did not linger in the center of the room. He did not wait for more thanks. His role here was finished. Margaret watched him for a moment longer, then turned back toward the counter, feeling something unfamiliar but welcome settle into her shoulders. Safety. The storm had passed, and in its wake, people were choosing care. Margaret moved slowly toward the counter, each step measured deliberate, as if she were relearning the shape of the room. Her hands no longer trembled, but they felt light, almost unfamiliar. She placed the order pad down and rested her palms against the cool surface, grounding herself in something solid and real. Behind her, quiet conversations resumed in fragments. Nothing loud, nothing forced, just small exchanges, careful and respectful, like people speaking in a place that had briefly become sacred. Someone asked if anyone needed coffee. Another person offered to wipe the table near the door. Ordinary kindness returned. The owner stood beside Margaret now, not looming, not directing, just present. He looked around the diner with new eyes, seeing not just customers, but people. He cleared his throat. "I'm going to comp your section today," he said. "And if you need to take a break, you can." Margaret considered it. The idea of stepping outside of letting the air hit her face was tempting, but she shook her head gently. "I'm okay," she said. And this time she meant it. She turned and began pouring fresh coffee, the familiar motion settling her nerves. The sound of liquid hitting ceramic felt reassuring. Normal. Life moving forward. Keanu returned to his booth and sat down without drawing attention. He adjusted the brim of his cap slightly and reached for his mug again. The coffee was still cold, but he didn't mind. He took a slow sip. Eyes drifting toward the window, where sunlight now filled the space the boy's shadow had once occupied. No one approached him right away. That felt right. After a moment, the mechanic walked past, his table paused, and gave a small nod. Not gratitude that demanded acknowledgement, just respect. Keanu nodded back, equally understated. Margaret glanced over once more from behind the counter. Their eyes met briefly. She offered the smallest smile, fragile but real. He returned it just as quietly. The diner felt warmer now, not physically but emotionally. The walls had not changed. The floor was still worn, the booths still creaked when people shifted, but something else had been repaired. Trust. Margaret took an order from a new customer who had just walked in, unaware of what had happened minutes earlier. She greeted them the same way she always did, calm, professional, kind, but there was a subtle difference in her voice now, less guarded, less tight. Outside traffic passed, the world continued. Inside, the moment settled into memory, carried differently by everyone who had witnessed it. Keanu finished his coffee and stood. He slid a few bills beneath the mug, more than enough. He did not wait for acknowledgement. He did not announce his departure. As he reached the door, Margaret called out softly, not wanting to stop him, just needing him to hear it one more time. "Thank you." He turned, nodded once, and stepped outside. The bell chimed gently behind him. Inside the diner, Margaret breathed out, squared her shoulders, and went back to work. The storm was over. What remained was quiet resilience, shared humanity, and the knowledge that sometimes healing begins the moment someone chooses to stand where silence once lived. The owner caught up to Keanu just as he reached the edge of his booth. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke, voice low and earnest. "Sir," he said, "please, at least let me take care of your meal. It's the least I can do." Keanu turned back, slightly listening, without impatience. He looked at the owner the way he had looked at everyone else that morning. Calm, attentive, unimpressed by gestures that placed him above others. "That's okay," he said. "You don't owe me anything." The owner opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. He nodded, accepting the answer, even if he did not fully understand it. Gratitude settled into his expression instead. Keanu reached into his pocket and placed a few bills on the table beneath his mug. The amount was more than enough. Not flashy, not dramatic, just quietly generous. The kind of tip meant to help without announcing itself. Margaret noticed it from behind the counter. She recognized the number immediately. Her chest tightened again, not with fear this time, but with something closer to awe. He had given without being asked, without expecting thanks, without wanting credit. He adjusted his jacket, brushing once more at the faint stain as if remembering it only now. Then he lifted his cap and settled it back onto his head brim, low, shadowing his face just enough to blend back into the diner's ordinary shape. People were watching him now, but not the way they might have if they knew who he was. There were no whispers, no phones raised, just quiet awareness. Respect without curiosity. Margaret leaned forward slightly, resting her hands on the counter as she watched him walk toward the door. She felt the strange certainty that she would never see him again. That this moment, this person existed only here, only now, and that was okay. Some people pass through your life briefly and change its direction forever. They do not stay. They are not meant to. Keanu paused near the door, glancing once more around the diner. Not to check for attention, not to collect gratitude, just to take in the space as it was now, calm, whole, human. The bell above the door chimed softly as he pushed it open. Cold air rushed in for a moment, carrying with it the smell of pavement and morning traffic. Sunlight framed him briefly in the doorway, then he stepped outside. The door closed behind him. Margaret remained still for a second longer than necessary, eyes fixed on the place he had been. She did not feel abandoned. She felt steadied, as if something important had been returned to her that she had not realized she had lost. She turned back to the counter, to the coffee, to the orders waiting to be taken. Life continued. The customers resumed their meals. Conversations restarted. Plates clinked. The diner settled back into its familiar rhythm. Only the audience knew what the people inside did not. That the quiet man who had walked out unnoticed was someone the world recognized instantly. That he had chosen anonymity over praise. And that somehow made the moment matter even more. Margaret watched the door long after it closed, the bell's soft ring still echoing in her ears. It wasn't longing that held her there. It was recognition. The quiet understanding that some moments do not repeat themselves, and some people are never meant to be part of your daily life. They arrive, they shift something essential, and they leave, before gratitude can turn into dependence. She exhaled slowly and turned back to the counter. A new order slip waited. Coffee needed refilling. The rhythm of work welcomed her back without judgment, without questions. That mattered. The world had not stopped because someone had done the right thing. It had simply continued, slightly altered. The owner stood nearby, still absorbing the calm that had replaced fear. He glanced once more at the table where Keanu had sat, then at the money left behind. He shook his head quietly, not in disbelief, but in appreciation. Some kindness did not need to be explained. It only needed to be honored. A customer near the window leaned back and spoke softly, almost to themselves. "Good man," they said. No one responded, not because they disagreed, but because the statement felt complete as it was. Margaret poured another cup of coffee and carried it to the mechanic, who accepted it with a nod and a faint smile. Their eyes met briefly, sharing something unspoken. Not hero worship, not relief alone, a reminder that people could choose differently. She moved through the diner with renewed steadiness, taking orders, wiping tables, greeting newcomers who had no idea what had just happened. To them, this was just another morning. To her, it was proof that dignity could be restored without spectacle. Outside, Keanu walked toward his car with the same unhurried pace he had carried inside. He did not check his phone. He did not look back. The diner behind him became just another building along the road, blending into the ordinary landscape of the day. He opened the door, sat down, and closed it gently. For a moment, he rested his hands on the steering wheel, eyes forward, breathing even. What had needed doing had been done. Nothing followed him, no applause, no thanks. That was how he preferred it. He started the engine and pulled away, merging into traffic, becoming another car among many. Inside the diner, Margaret paused once more near the counter. She caught her reflection in the stainless steel surface and barely recognized it. Her shoulders were straighter, her expression calmer. The weariness remained, but it no longer felt like defeat. She picked up her order pad and smiled at the next customer. "What can I get you?" she asked. The words felt lighter. The audience knew the name of the man who had walked out quietly. They knew his face, his history, his reputation. The people inside the diner did not. To them, he was simply someone who had chosen to stand when it mattered and leave when it was done. That difference mattered, because the lesson was never about fame or power. It was about choice, about where you place your body, about when you speak, about knowing that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is act, then disappear, leaving dignity behind where fear once lived. The diner settled back into itself slowly, like a body relearning how to breathe after holding tension for too long. Plates clinked, coffee poured, the grill hissed softly from the kitchen. The ordinary sounds returned, but they carried a different weight now. Quieter, more careful. As if everyone understood, without needing to say it, that something important had passed through this small space. Margaret moved between tables with a steadiness that surprised even her. Her steps were the same as before, but her posture was not. Her shoulders were back, her chin lifted just slightly. She did not rush. She did not shrink. The exhaustion was still there. The bills, the long shifts, the quiet worries waiting at home, none of that had vanished. But something else had been added. Confidence without defiance, dignity without apology. A customer thanked her more deliberately than usual. Another held the door for someone behind them. Small gestures, easy to overlook, but layered together, they changed the tone of the room. People spoke softer, listened longer. The memory of what had happened lingered like warmth rather than fear. The owner watched it all from behind the counter. He noticed how the room felt different. Not safer because trouble had been removed, but safer because it had been answered. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that protection did not always come from authority or policies or rules on the wall. Sometimes it came from someone choosing to stand where silence had been. Outside, traffic moved steadily along the road. The morning sun climbed higher, washing the pavement in light. Keanu's car disappeared into the flow, indistinguishable from the rest. No one followed. No one waved. No one chased the moment for more meaning than it already had. He was gone. Inside life continued. And that was the point. What happened in the diner did not need witnesses beyond those who were there. It did not need a headline. It did not need a recording. It mattered because it happened at all. Because in a moment where cruelty expected silence, someone chose presence instead. Strength did not arrive loudly that morning. It did not announce itself. It did not perform. It stood calmly. It spoke once. It refused to move. And when dignity was restored, it left. Margaret wiped down the counter and glanced toward the door one last time, not searching for him, but acknowledging the space he had filled, and then released. She understood something now that she hadn't before. Help did not always look like rescue. Sometimes it looked like someone standing beside you long enough for the threat to pass. The diner returned fully to normal by late morning. New customers came and went, unaware of the quiet transformation that had taken place. The booths held different people. The coffee was refilled again and again. But something remained. A memory, a standard, a question that stayed just beneath the surface. Not about who the man was, but about who any of us choose to be when no one is watching. By the time the lunch crowd began to trickle in, the diner had fully returned to its rhythm. Orders were called. Plates were carried. Laughter rose briefly from a corner booth, then faded into the steady hum of conversation. To anyone walking in, it looked like nothing more than another ordinary place along an ordinary road. But for those who had been there earlier, something subtle remained. They spoke a little softer. They watched each other a little closer. They remembered. Margaret noticed it in the way people made eye contact now, in the way apologies came quicker, in the way patience seemed easier to reach. She felt it in herself, most of all. Not as pride, not as triumph, but as grounding. The knowledge that when her dignity had been threatened, it had not vanished into the air. Someone had seen it, someone had valued it, and that knowledge stayed. Outside, the morning carried on without pause. The road swallowed cars and stories alike. Keanu was already gone, folded back into a world that knew his face but had not witnessed this moment. He would not speak of it. He would not remember it as something extraordinary. For him, it had simply been a choice made at the right time. That was the lesson. Strength does not always announce itself with raised voices or clenched fists. It does not need to humiliate to correct or dominate to protect. It does not look for permission, and it does not wait for applause. Real strength recognizes a line being crossed and steps into the space where harm is happening, calmly, clearly, without needing to become what it stands against. The boy had left that diner stripped not of dignity, but of arrogance. No one chased him, no one shouted after him. The correction had already happened, quietly, completely, and because it was not cruel, it had the chance to matter. Margaret carried that understanding with her as the day went on. She would carry it home. She would carry it into the next long shift, the next hard conversation, the next moment when silence tempted her to shrink. She would remember that dignity does not require permission, that help can arrive without noise, that one person choosing to stand can change the temperature of an entire room. And so the story does not really end at the diner door. It moves outward, into other rooms, other moments, other choices, because somewhere every day dignity is tested in small, quiet ways, in places without cameras, in moments without witnesses. And the question is never about strength as spectacle. It is about strength as action. If you had been there that morning, would you have stood? If you were afraid, would you still have stayed? And when no one was watching, what kind of strength would you want to embody? Take a moment and think about that. Share your thoughts in the comments, not to judge others, but to reflect on yourself. And if there's a story you want to see next, a moment where quiet courage makes a difference, let us know. Because sometimes the stories worth telling are not about heroes who arrive loudly, but about ordinary people who choose in a single moment to stand where silence once lived.